Monday, I came up to Boston with a group of friends to watch the Red Sox game, and then go watch the runners on the close to the finish line at a bar called Forum. We heard a loud noise. Everybody, I think all of us, turned around. I saw a lot of smoke. I saw people, crying and running, and I immediately thought it was some sort of a terrorist attack, because it reminded me of something I saw on the September 11th events. Before I could even think of what to do, the second blast happened, and I found myself catapulted into the bar on the ground. I felt like my foot was on fire. I was in a lot of pain, and I couldn't stand up. I was just hoping I wasn't going to die.
Emergency medical technicians, Boston police, and some 400 National Guardsmen already on hand for the race immediately triage the wounded. And just after 6 p.m., President Obama addresses the country, vowing to find those responsible.
Make no mistake, we will get to the bottom of this.
We have followed her story through every stage. Join Heather Abbott in her incredible strength after losing a leg to the Boston Marathon bombings. And now she is home. From her Newport apartment, Abbott tells us she feels blessed for the incredible encouragement.
This week, a technician in New Hampshire shaped one of her prosthetic legs that will let her wear 4-inch heels. She told reporters she's looking to make good on her hospital pledge to get back on her feet, literally.
Wearing heels can be painful sometimes, but it's only painful in one leg now, or one foot.
On Monday, I will be at the marathon. I'll be with all my friends from last year, and I will be waiting for Erin Chatham to come close to the finish line. Erin found me when I was struck with shrapnel last year. She and her husband, Matt, helped me get to safety, and she's running her first marathon, and I'll be hopping in to join her for the last half mile.
It is amazing to see, just like she did every year on April 15th, Heather Abbott went to the Red Sox game and then went on to cheer the runners in the Boston Marathon. But she was one of the victims of the attack, and today she is a strong survivor. Frankly, you just have to see it to believe it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Well, it's great to be here today. I have to tell you, I was in South Dakota yesterday, and after listening to that video, my Boston accent was made painfully aware. And I really tried to pronounce my R's. But I'm right at home here, which is great. Like I said, it's really nice to be here with all of you, especially in the Boston area where so many of you probably were at Marathon Monday that day, or knew somebody who was running, or knew somebody who was there. On behalf of the other Boston Marathon bombing survivors, this is one of the only chances that we get to thank you for the support. So I would like to start by doing that. It's very much appreciated, and I'll tell you some more about why it's so important as I talk to you today. When I first started to be asked to speak to audiences about my experience, it was a little uncomfortable for me. I mean, I had a career initially in accounting, which didn't last long. I then switched shortly after to human resources, which I was more comfortable with. However, I didn't do a lot of public speaking. And when I did, it was about affirmative action and diversity training, and there were a lot of yawns in the audience. And I had to remember what I was going to say, so it was always nerve-wracking. Now people wanted me to talk about my story. Well, it's certainly something I can't forget. And people are interested in hearing about it. So it was different for me. And I took the words of advice from someone who I really admired listening to speak about, close to a year and a half ago now. I had the opportunity to open up for Robin Roberts, and you've probably seen Robin on Good Morning America, and know a little bit about her struggles with cancer and other issues. So she had told the audience that what she decided to do was make her mess her message. And so I thought that sounded brilliant. So what I'd like to do today is share my mess with you. And along the way, I'll tell you about my message, which really involves 3 kind of life strategies, I guess I would call them, that I think can be used by really any of you in overcoming adversity. Now, my example of adversity is kind of an extreme one, and probably won't share it with anyone else in this room, I certainly hope. However, we all go through different types of adversity in our lifetime. And whatever the most difficult thing is that we have to deal with, it's the most difficult one to us, and it's all we know. So whether it is a divorce in our family, unfavorable medical diagnosis, whatever it is, a failed job opportunity, we all go through things that are difficult, and we need a way to get through them. So I'm going to tell you how I got through mine, and I hope it'll help you with yours. But before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and what my life was like prior to the Boston Marathon bombing. So before April 15th of 2013, I was living in Newport, Rhode Island, and I had a pretty active lifestyle. I loved to be by the beach, which is one of the reasons I lived there. I was an avid runner and paddleboarder. You could always find me out on somebody's boat on the weekend. And things were pretty good. I was working full-time in human resources at a large defense contractor. And my career was doing great. And I was thinking about my next career move and had been interviewing with a large company down in Charleston, South Carolina. So life was pretty good, as you can see. So these are a few pictures of me showing off my legs. These are some of the last ones that I have. But when April 2013 rolled around, my friends talked about going to see the Boston Marathon, and it was something that we did every year, like probably a lot of you may do. As you know, it's a really fun day here in Massachusetts. It's a holiday for many, Patriots Day, one of the first days of spring. So if you've ever been to the marathon, you know that it's a lot of fun. It's a celebratory experience, and there are people from all over the world visiting Boston. So this Marathon Monday was no different. A group of 7 of us took the train from Providence up to Boston, like we always do. We watched the Red Sox game, and they weren't doing so well. It was early in the season that year. And we decided to leave a little bit early and head over to the finish line to visit see some of our friends that come to Newport in the summer who live in the city. We always meet them at a bar, a restaurant called Forum. It's changed names many times over the years and looks like it'll be changing names again soon. But that was the place. So we finished watching the game, and my group of 7 got split up, and 3 of us were lagging a little bit behind. So we got a text from the other 4 that said they were already inside Forum, and to meet them inside. We were going to get something to eat and then watch the runners cross the finish line when we were done. So just as I was approaching the finish line, and I now know after seeing videos of it that I had only been standing there 21 seconds before I heard the first blast, just about to walk inside of the restaurant. I remember turning in the direction of it, and the first thing that came to my mind was 9/11. I saw smoke in the air, people were screaming, and that was the first thought I had, but I really didn't have a chance to think of anything else because within 12 seconds, the second explosion happened. And I was catapulted into the open doors of the restaurant, and I landed inside. There was smoke everywhere. There was glass on the ground, blood. People were running for their lives, and it was chaos. I was in a lot of pain. When I came to, I could tell that my foot was severely damaged. It felt like it was on fire. I looked down at it quickly, and the doctor's presentation before mine was a reminder of why I didn't look at it for long. I didn't see anything too gruesome, and I just knew I was in a lot of pain, and if I looked at it too closely, I might go into shock and not be able to get myself out of there. So I saw it, and then I realized I couldn't run. Everybody was running away from the street towards the back exit of the restaurant. Nobody knew if there was another explosion. I knew I couldn't run. I couldn't even get up. So I started calling out for help. And I can remember thinking that I might die on the floor of that restaurant. I might get trampled, or nobody might stop to help me. But I was really lucky that that wasn't the case. A woman heard me calling and stopped, and I could tell by the look on her face that my foot must be pretty bad. She started trying to help me get up, and when she realized that I couldn't walk at all, she called her husband over, and he picked me up and carried me to the exit of the restaurant where everybody was gathering towards the back alley. And I can remember her asking me my name over and over again. And it's funny, you know, that's one of the only memories I have of that whole experience is him picking me up and her asking me my name and thinking to myself, I already told you my name a few times now, and I got a lot going on here, like, can you just remember it? But apparently she was trying to keep me alert. So they eventually got me into the ambulance, and I was told later on that when the ambulance doors closed, the couple's name was Matt and Erin. Matt said to Erin, you know, God, how are we going to know what happened to this woman? I hope she's going to be okay. Well, Erin, you asked her name. What did she say? And Erin said, I can't remember. But luckily, Matt happened to be a former New England Patriots football player. And he was at the forum that day supporting his friend Joe Andruzzi's foundation. So Matt was interviewed by CNN, and he told the story about the woman he helped at the marathon. And somebody that knew me heard it and said, that sounds an awful lot like Heather, and eventually connected the two of us. So luckily, I was able to meet Matt and Erin in the hospital just a few days after the bombing. And I was able to thank them myself for helping me that day. And they've become very good friends of mine. And I tell them all the time that they're my heroes, and they always tell me that they're not heroes and that they didn't do anything that day different than a lot of people did. And they're actually right. There wasn't a lot of medical personnel to go around, and civilians had to step up and help each other. And they did, and it was pretty amazing because they could have been hurt themselves. So I'm really happy to have met Matt and Erin and become a part of their family. They have two small children that have no idea what they did that day. And I think it's going to be pretty amazing someday when they find out. But I'll always be thankful to them. So I always like to mention them when I speak to people. So when I was in the hospital, within the first few days, doctors were trying to assess whether or not my leg was going to be salvageable. They said that they needed to do a few surgeries and really check it out to see what they could do. So I was really hopeful that I would be able to walk on my two legs again. But after 4 surgeries in a few days, they came to me with a recommendation to amputate. They said it was my decision, but I had a choice to make. And the situation was I could keep my leg. They told me that it would be shorter, my left leg would be shorter than my right. I'd be in chronic pain. I would probably only be able to wear sneakers on my feet. I'd never run again. I'd probably have to use a crutch or a cane, and I'd have to have dozens and dozens of surgeries just to get that far. Or I could have my leg amputated. So as you can imagine, neither of these choices were very attractive. And not really what I wanted to hear. I can remember when the doctor came in with the recommendation, I was in there with my mom. And I think my dad took the whole thing maybe worse than I did. And I remember saying to her, how are we going to tell Dad? So it was really it was a tough thing to hear, and I really didn't know what to do. I mean, if you can just imagine, sitting here today and a few hours from now having someone tell you that you had to make a decision to have your leg amputated. I mean, what would you do? I know I knew absolutely nothing about what it would be like to be an amputee or to wear a prosthetic leg. So at that time, I was doing a lot of what ifs and why me's. What if I hadn't left the Red Sox game early that day? Why was I the one that was hurt when so many people were standing so close to me and they weren't hurt at all? Why was it me? I was doing that a lot. And that's when, when I look back, this first life strategy came into play and helped me start to move forward. And that was to recognize what I couldn't change. I could ask those questions, what if and why me, all I wanted. But I was never going to get an answer. There were no answers. So what I needed to do was figure out what my options were and make a decision and move on. So I started by doing a little bit of research myself. I decided that I needed to know, what being an amputee was going to be like. And it was kind of surprising to find out that there were about 2 million people in the United States living with limb loss. Close to 200,000 occur each year, amputations. And I also found out that I was in the minority when it came to amputees. Most are men, most are over the age of 50, and most suffer from vascular disease, oftentimes diabetes. So I knew if this was the path I chose, there weren't going to be a whole lot of people like me. I also found out that you don't just get a prosthetic leg and that's the end of it. I think that's what I thought. You actually need to get several over the course of your lifetime because they wear out. They last about 3 to 5 years. And there are different types of prosthetic devices needed for different types of activities. Most people are lucky enough to have one that allows them to walk. However, if you'd like one to run, to swim, or to wear high heels, oftentimes you're on your own. Insurance does not consider those activities medically necessary. And the devices are extremely expensive. They cost between $15,000 and upwards of $100,000 each, depending upon the type of amputation and device needed. Some of you may have heard of my friend Jeff Bowman, who lost both of his legs above the knee in the bombing. His prosthetic legs cost $98,000 each. And they're not covered by health insurance because they're so advanced. However, they allow him to be safe when he walks. So it's kind of ironic and unusual, but that's the case. So this was pretty daunting to me. But I still needed to make the decision, and I needed more help. I was really lucky that some other amputees came to the hospital to show me the ropes. So many of our United States veterans flew in from all over the country. They had lost limbs in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they walked into my hospital room, and they showed me that I was going to be functional again, which was an incredible relief to me. I mean, I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know the difference between an above-the-knee amputation and a below-the-knee amputation and how that would affect my walking or limitations or anything. So they were able to explain a lot of that to me. They were able to explain the healing process, and they all told me that I would get back to living my life as close to the way I did before as I possibly could, if I wanted to, using a prosthetic device. So that was extremely helpful. One of the veterans that came to visit me, his name is BJ, and he had that same limb salvage decision to make that I did. And he actually held on to his limb for 10 years. And when he heard about me, he said, he needed to come visit right away. He flew in from Wisconsin. And he told me that on the plane, he thought about, all the questions that I might ask him. And he said he couldn't wait to see me because he was finally going to be able to help somebody, in a similar position to him, help them not waste years of their lives the way he did. And he had all the answers for me. So he said, and our visit is a little foggy to me because I was on a lot of drugs at the time. But he said that when he came into my hospital room, he told me the story, his story of how he lost his leg and how he grappled with that decision and eventually did have his leg amputated. And then he asked me if I had any questions for him, and he was all ready. And apparently my burning question at the time was whether or not I'd be able to wear high heels again. So BJ said he had thought of every question but that one, and he just didn't know what to tell me. Now, as you can imagine, especially the women here in the room, I had a lot of questions like that. If I was going to be an amputee, what was this going to be like? What kind of shoes would I be able to wear? What kind of clothes would I wear? Would I ever get a pedicure again? You know, how is this going to all work? Well, BJ and the other veterans were all men. And they were really helpful, showing me how functional I'd be able to be. But I still had these questions, and asking them or the surgeons in my hospital room at Brigham and Women's didn't seem appropriate, although these questions were really bothering me. And I later found out that they were also on the minds of the other women amputees. So I talked to the nurses a little bit about it. And one of them told me that I had to meet Aviva Drescher. Well, I didn't know who Aviva Drescher was, but she went on to tell me that she's an amputee, and she's on the show, The Real Housewives of New York City. Well, I hadn't watched the show before, so I didn't know about Aviva. But they kept telling me about her and how she does everything that all the other women do, and she wears heels, and she gets pedicures, and so I was really lucky that Aviva, when she heard about the bombing, happened to call the hospital where I was, Brigham and Women's, and asked whether there were any female amputees that she could visit. So they said, we have just the person for you that's struggling with this decision. So Aviva walked into my hospital room in her 4.5-inch high heels and skinny jeans, and as soon as I saw her, I said, I can do this. So people like BJ and Aviva were really instrumental in helping me make my decision. And that's where this second life strategy that I have to tell you about comes in, which is relying on others for support. So once I was able to stop focusing on what I couldn't change and rely on other people for support, I was beginning to move on. And eventually I made that decision to have my leg amputated, as you all know. And I never looked back. So I had lots of support. The hospital staff was incredible. These are a few pictures of some of the nurses and physical therapists that helped me out. At the bottom, you can see me and Claire in our blue Heather t-shirts. Claire is the one who arranged for Aviva to visit me. She was my ICU nurse. You can also see me throwing the first pitch at a Red Sox game with my physical therapist, Dara. When the Red Sox called me when I was at Spalding Rehab and asked me to throw out the first pitch, I thought, how could I say no to this? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? But I don't know how to throw a baseball. So I told Dara this, and she said, Heather, you can't turn this down. You have to do it. So I said, all these people are going to be looking at me. What if he doesn't catch it? And she said, we're going to figure this out. So Dara decided that from then on, in physical therapy, I would practice throwing a baseball, and one of my other bombing survivor friends, Roseanne, would be my catcher. And that's what we did. And so on a drizzly day in May, I got to go out and throw out the first pitch at a Red Sox game with Dara right next to me, the year they won the World Series. And it was incredible. It was a great feeling. And I'm so glad that she talked me into doing that. I also had an occupational therapist named Sam, who you can see in the picture next to me wearing my one high heel. Sam was great because Sam let me continue to be who I was. When I was asked to do a press conference at Spalding, I told them, sure, I'd be happy to do it. I told one of my girlfriends to bring one of my purple dresses from home, and I told her the shoes that I usually wear with it. I said, I'm only going to need one for right now. And she brought it in. And when Sam was helping me get ready for the press conference, she said, okay, Heather, where are your shoes? Where's your shoe? Let's get it on. And I pulled out my tan pump, and she looked at me and said, "What's that?" She said, "You're on crutches." So it hadn't really occurred to me that this would be an issue. She said, "You can't be a high heel Heather when you're on crutches." So I said, "Well, I didn't really think of that." And she looked at me, and then she said, for the first time in her career, adjusted my crutches to accommodate this high heel. And she told me I better practice up and down the hallway a few times before I tripped in front of all the news media. So I did, and it went off without a hitch. And it was really nice of them to really care about the person I am and let me be that person and help me to do the things that I wanted to do, not the things that maybe other people wanted to do or the things they were trained to help people do. And it was kind of funny because one weekend, Dara told me that she wouldn't be at the hospital, and I'd see her in a few days. And I said, "Oh, okay, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, it's my graduation." And I thought, oh my God, you haven't even graduated yet? But I guess it just goes to show you that, although experience and knowledge is certainly important, it's not everything. And I still really appreciate Dara and Sam for their help. I also got support from friends and family and the community. If you remember that time, everybody was helping out the bombing victims and holding fundraisers, and everybody was going to help me get those prosthetic legs that I needed to get my life back, which was really important to me. So they were a huge sense of support as well. I also had a very unusual support network in some local and national celebrities. And whenever I think about this time in my life, I think about other amputees and how they don't typically have this support. But I was interviewed by all sorts of different folks that we all know, Anderson Cooper and Natalie Morales and Maria Menounos. Michelle Obama visited me in the hospital a few times, and I get a Christmas card from the White House every year now. But one of the things I remember most is when I got my first prosthetic leg. I was really excited to get it. I hadn't walked independently in about 10 weeks. I was relying on other people to drive me everywhere, to do everything for me, and I had it because I was used to living a very independent lifestyle. So it was finally time to get my first prosthetic leg, and I couldn't wait. I was finally going to get my independence back, and this was going to be the first step, literally and figuratively. So it was a really exciting day for me, and it ended sort of bittersweet, though, because when I got the leg, I tried it on. It was extremely painful to put on. It was huge. My leg was still very swollen at the time, so the leg they made for me was big and bulky, not attractive at all. And when I put it on and tried to walk in it for the first time, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. How do these people walk on these things? It feels nothing like my real leg. It was really kind of deflating, to be honest. So when I came home, I was supposed to be putting this leg on for an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, every day, and building time up so that I would eventually wear it all day long. And it was just so painful even to put on that I have to be honest, I stuck it in the corner and sat on the couch for a while. And I wasn't doing so well. And then I got a call from Beyonce's assistant. And she said, "Heather, Beyonce saw you on the cover of People, and she's going to be in Boston for a concert. And she'd like to meet you before the concert backstage, and then she'd like you to sit in the front row." Well, let me tell you, I got that leg right out of the corner. And I said, if I'm going to meet Beyonce, I'm going to be standing up. And I did. So, this is one of the examples when I think I've met so many other amputees and think about, that time in my life and how I got up off that couch because Beyonce called me. Well, Beyonce is not calling everybody. So I give them a lot of credit, for figuring out how to do it without all the help that I received and the other bombing amputees received, because it was a huge help and something I'll always be grateful for. But they really need to be recognized for that. And speaking of the other bombing amputees, they are probably one of my hugest support systems, and they continue to be. There are 17 of us who lost limbs. 3 people died in the bombing. And the amputees range, at the time, in age from 6 to 70. Although most of us fall in between mid-20s and mid-50s. So we've become a very close group, and it's sort of funny to see videos and pictures from that day and see how close we were all standing to each other, knowing that we would have never met had it not been for what happened. And honestly, they're the only other people who really understand this whole situation. You know, it's odd enough to become an amputee, but in this way that was so public was especially unique and unusual. So it's really important to have them as a support system. We do a lot of things together now. We try things out that we're a little concerned about trying out in public at first. For example, we had amputee yoga classes. We told Jeff they were stretching classes so that he'd go. We knew if we said yoga, he wouldn't come. But we tried those things out together to see, you know, what it was going to be like. And then eventually, you know, if we felt comfortable, we'd go out into a regular yoga class and know we could do it. So things like that have been really great. One of my favorite of this group is the youngest amputee, Jane. Jane lost her brother in the bombing, and she also lost her left leg below the knee. And at the time, she was 6. So she's run circles around the rest of us and has really been quite an inspiration for us. And I think that we've all been a help for her parents to see that as adults, we've all moved on with our lives, and people are getting married and having children and going back to work, and Jane will do all of that stuff too. But one of my favorite stories about Jane involves a time that I was at the ear doctor at Mass Eye and Ear. I would oftentimes see other bombing victims in the lobby because so many of us had ear injuries as well. And one day I was checking out there, and I felt somebody tugging at my coat. And I looked down, and it was Jane. And I said, "Oh, Jane, what are you doing here?" And she told me she had an appointment with her dad. Well, at the time, I had just gotten my high heel leg, and I had it on. And Jane was looking at me, and she said, "Heather, that's not the leg you were wearing the last time I saw you." So I said, "Oh, no, that's right. This is my high heel leg. What do you think?" And she looked at it for a while, and then she said, "You want to switch?" So she has provided many laughs for all of us, and really been great. So I'm really excited to go down to the Marine Corps Marathon with some of these folks this weekend and spend some time with them. So with all that support, I got back to doing all the things that I love. Within the first 6 months after my amputation, I was running again, I was stand-up paddleboarding, and I was back in my high heels. So this was pretty amazing to a lot of people, although other amputees do it all the time. But because the bombing was such a public tragedy, and people were so interested in our recovery process, the whole world got to find out just how quickly people can actually recover from an amputation, and everybody was interested in hearing about it. So I was all over the media. I was in all sorts of different magazines and publications and different news shows and talk shows, and I began to find that other women, especially, were beginning to reach out to me for help. Asking questions. If they were about to undergo an amputation or had recently had one, they had a lot of the same questions that I had before I became an amputee. And they wanted some answers, and I was able to help them. So this is where that third life strategy really comes in. And I began to realize that I had an opportunity to pay it forward. And I really got to know that when I met this little boy named Juan Jen. I was asked to attend the Run the Bluegrass Half Marathon down in Kentucky in March of 2014, so not quite a year after the bombing. And I was told that the runners at the half marathon had been raising funds for my recovery fund, and that they would really like me to be their special guest that weekend. I had never been to Kentucky, so I said, sure, I'd love to go down. So I went down, and I was on the local news, And a woman was in touch with me shortly after and said she had seen me on the news and she wondered if she and her son could meet me. She said that she had adopted a little boy who was 7 named Wan Zhen. And she adopted him from China, where he was given up for adoption because he had a disability called cleft foot. So he had problems with his foot. And as he was growing, doctors were noticing that it was becoming more and more difficult for him to walk. And the way that his bones were growing, the most likely option for him to have an active lifestyle as he grew older was to have his leg amputated. But that was a decision that his mom would have to make for him, which, as you can only imagine, was very difficult for her. So she asked if she could talk to me a little bit about it. So she and Wan Zhen came to the marathon, and I got to talk to them a little bit before and tell them about my decision-making process and what life was like for me. I had my running leg on, so I did a little running for Wan Zhen and showed him what my bouncy leg looked like. And they went on their way. And his mom got in touch with me a couple days later to thank me for meeting with them. And she said, you know, Heather, I think you might have done a little too good of a job because Wan Zhen wants one of those legs now. So I've kept in touch with them. And so far to date, Wan Zhen still hasn't had his leg amputated. But it's really nice to know that I was able to help them understand that if that does become the path that they go down in the future, that life goes on. I also began to realize that my story was affecting not only other amputees, but all different types of people going through all different types of adversity. And I began to realize that, I came to realize that when I met this little boy named Dristan. So Dristan has epilepsy, and it's caused by cysts that grows on his brain. And he's had several different operations, and is always in and out of Boston Children's Hospital. He was at the marathon the day of the bombing, cheering on a runner, running for his cause for the Boston Children's Hospital. And he wasn't hurt. But as you can imagine, as a 7 or 8-year-old little boy at the time, he was very affected by that day. So when I was on the news shortly after, his mom told him that I lived a couple towns over from them and that she had a mutual friend with me. And he said, well, Mom, we have to get her my teddy bear. He had a teddy bear that he had when he was in the hospital that he said helped him feel better. And he wanted me to have it because he thought it would help me. So they sent the teddy bear to the hospital, along with a lot of other stuff. I vaguely remember getting it, but there was so much going on at the time that I kind of put it out of my thoughts and was concentrating on all else that I had to deal with. But later that summer when I was home, I was asked to throw out the first pitch at a local baseball game in Newport, where I live. And I was told that Dristan was going to be there, and he wanted to meet me. I was reminded about the teddy bear situation. So when I walked up to the ball field, Dristan was standing there. He was the first person I saw, and he was wearing a blue Heather Strong t-shirt, and he was holding up a big pink sign that said, Heather, I love you. And I mean, he is pretty cute. So it was great to finally meet him. And his mom told me that he would be going in the hospital again in a few weeks. So after the game, I signed the ball that I threw out and gave it to Dristan. And I told him I'd come visit him at Boston Children's in a few weeks and wished him luck. His mom got in touch with me a little while later and said that Dristan had been sleeping with the ball every night. And she told me that while they were watching the game, she asked him, you know, whether or not he was nervous about going in for his surgery in a few weeks. And he said, well, you know, Mom, I've been kind of nervous about it, but I just watched Heather, and she walked out on the field, and she only has one real leg, and she smiled and waved at everybody, and I think if she can do that, I'm going to be all right. So it was really great to hear that and to know that that I was able to have an effect on somebody that is dealing with something completely different than what I am. But I began to realize that paying it forward was going to be an important part of my healing process. And Dristan is still a very good friend of mine. So I've told you about most of the first year following the bombing. And everybody was asking me as the 2014 marathon approached whether or not I'd go. And there was no question in my mind that I'd be there. I was there every year. And throughout that year, Matt Chatham, the woman who helped me, told me that she was going to run her very first marathon in honor of me. And all throughout the year, I would see her posts on Facebook about training for the marathon and how difficult it was. And I can remember thinking, I'm going for my own marathon over here. We're both kind of training for this. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could cross the finish line together? Now, people always think that I was running the marathon when I got hurt. And they ask me when am I going to run another one? And I always have to clarify that I wasn't running. I would not have been running on 2 legs. I am not running on 1 leg. So I knew I wasn't going to be running the marathon. But I asked the Boston Athletic Association if I could hop in at the end with her and cross the finish line. I thought it'd be really symbolic because we had met at that finish line in such different circumstances just a year ago. So they let me do it, and I can't tell you what a great feeling it was to see Erin turning that corner and being able to jump in with her and cross the finish line. So here are some pictures of us from that day. It was really exciting. And like I said, she's and her husband Matt are good friends of mine now and remain to be an important part of my life. So life is different now. Since the Boston Marathon bombing. I do a lot of public speaking, and I've been able to go all over the country talking to different audiences about my experience. I keep in touch with those veterans that helped me, and you can see in the picture in the middle here, BJ wearing the red shirt is the one that I asked about high heels. He is running his first marathon ever on 1 leg this weekend at the Marine Corps Marathon. So I cannot wait to go cheer him on. He hasn't been training as much as I thought he would, so I told him my flight is out on Sunday night. Maybe I should have made it Monday morning. But I'm looking forward to seeing him and seeing him cross that finish line. That's going to be amazing. And there's also a picture here of me with some of the other bombing amputees. It was taken about a year ago. And I always like to tell people about this picture because a lot of people think that we're all doing fantastic and moving on with our lives and could be standing here in 4-inch heels just like I am. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I am among the very lucky of the 17 of us, in that really my only injuries were my left foot and my hearing. But a lot of people had shrapnel embedded in their bodies everywhere. My friend Jessica, who you can see in the wheelchair with a brace around her leg, had 1 amputated leg wearing a sneaker in that picture. But the leg in the brace was trying to be salvaged. She tried saving it for a long time, and at that point, a year and a half had gone by since the bombing, and she still was in the wheelchair. And she wasn't able to walk on that right leg, and she was having so much trouble. She was eventually admitted by special permission from the Pentagon to Walter Reed Hospital. Walter Reed did a lot of surgeries on Jessica to figure out what to do with that right leg. And eventually, this past January, it was amputated. So Jessica is now a double below the knee amputee. However, I did get to see Jessica last weekend at our friend JP Norden's wedding. JP is also an amputee from the bombing. He and his brother lost legs. He invited all of us amputees. We had our own table, and his prosthetist sat at it, so I guess in case we had any emergencies. But Jessica was out on the dance floor in 2 high-heel prosthetic legs. So it was really amazing to see her, but it has taken a long time. Mark, the other gentleman in the picture in the wheelchair wearing the red jacket, followed Jessica's example and went down to Walter Reed. One of his legs is amputated above the knee. He's trying to save the other one. We don't know what's going to happen. Mark is still struggling a lot. He was at that wedding, and he was in a lot of pain. So it's not over for anyone, and in some ways worse than others. I'll never have my leg back, but I have been able to move on with my life quicker than some of the others have, and luckily haven't had a series of injuries. But I always like to remind people of this because it's not as easy as it looks, and so many other people are still struggling a lot more than I am. So I told you about my 3 life strategies. allowing yourself to move on and recognize what you can't change, relying on others for support, and using the opportunity to pay it forward when you can. And I began to realize that that paying it forward part was probably the most important of those three. And you know how I told you about how expensive those prosthetic legs were? Well, I was very lucky that $81 million was raised for the Boston One Fund. I don't have to worry about the cost of my prosthetic legs. So I have 4 different legs that I use for all different activities. I attribute them in large part to why I am sane today. I was able to get back to doing all the things that I love, although a little bit different than it used to be. They were a big part in my recovery process, not just for function, but for the sanity that they gave me. And during these last couple of years, I have met so many other amputees who don't have that same luxury. And unfortunately, that's what it is a luxury. Children who can't run because their parents can't afford $15,000 running legs that need to be replaced every time they grow. Women who never have the opportunity to wear high heels. People who can't do the activities that they did before or always wanted to try, simply because they can't afford them. So that is what inspired me to start the Heather Abbott Foundation. And our mission is to provide prosthetic devices, specialized prosthetic devices, to limb loss victims of traumatic circumstances. And you may have seen us on the news this week. These pictures are taken from our launch party, which was on Marathon weekend this past year. All the other bombing amputees came out to support me, and you can see a picture of us here. Little Jane is right in the front. You'll see a picture of Hillary as well, standing with me. Now, Hillary and I were on the news this past week because Hillary became the very first recipient of a Heather Abbott Foundation leg. Hillary's 26, and she suffers from a disease with a very long name that I always say wrong, but it's nicknamed NF. And it causes tumors to grow on her nerve endings. It started when she was 13, and Hillary and I were connected by one of my nurses at Brigham when she decided to finally have her leg amputated 2 years ago. Hillary needed advice, like a lot of other amputees do, and I was there to help her with whatever I could. And in the time that I knew her, she told me that she loved my high heel leg. She told me that she had never been able to wear them because her problems with her legs started when she was so young. She was only able to wear sneakers from age 13 on. And now that she was an amputee, you know, she would only be able to wear flat shoes, and she had always wished she'd be able to wear heels. And so when I started the foundation, Hillary didn't ask me for help. She asked me what she could do to help me. And she was really supportive. And I couldn't think of a better person to be the first recipient of a leg from us. So I was really excited to give Hillary her high heel leg on Monday and watch her walk in her 3-inch heels for the first time. It was really, really exciting for both of us. I don't know who was more excited. And we are also preparing to give this little girl, Corey, a running leg. Corey's 8. She lost her leg when she was 2 in a lawnmower accident. And she likes to play soccer and gymnastics. And I have observed her running in this leg she's wearing, and it is not a pretty sight. So the Challenged Athletes Foundation and the Heather Abbott Foundation are partnering to buy Corey a running leg. And she'll be receiving it soon, and she has no idea what she's in for. She is going to love it. So we're really, really excited about that. And if you'd like to keep up with our progress, here's our information. We do have a website, heatherabbottfoundation.org, and we post all of our activity on social media, Facebook and Twitter. So I certainly welcome you to keep up with our progress and see what kind of prosthetic devices we're giving out. There are all sorts of different needs out there. It's so strange, you know. I looked at my email the other day, and the subject was eye. It was a prosthetic eye. You know, I have all these strange requests all the time now, but it really is amazing how expensive these things are and how little insurance costs. So it's been great to be able to help others, get what they need to live their lives and pay it forward, like I said. So I hope that you will remember my 3 life strategies and be able to use them at some other point in your life. Again, on behalf of me and the other Boston Marathon bombing survivors, thanks to all of you who provided support for us, whether it was emotional or financial. We are extremely grateful. I'm standing here in a $70,000 leg right now because of people like you. So I always like to take that opportunity, like I said, to say thanks. So before I leave, I would certainly be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And every time I ask this, people are always reluctant, but I'm happy to answer anything, really. I just spoke to 600 12-year-olds a couple of weeks ago who all had their hands raised. So I'm sure they're out there if there's anything I can answer. Yes?
Heather, where do the prostheses come from? Are you working with companies from all over the world? Are there a lot in Boston who are working on developing these different prostheses? Can you share a little about where they come from?
Yeah, so there are a couple of prosthetic device providers that are really big, the ones kind of everybody knows. One is called Össur and another is called Ottobock. And they are headquartered one is in Iceland and the other is in Germany, but they do have offices here. They've been working with the foundation to help provide us with some devices. And I've also worked with them on going to Capitol Hill and talking to state representatives on making some changes in these insurance laws to help provide more coverage for amputees. There are also companies out there that are now starting to do 3D printed devices, and hopefully that will be something that picks up in the future and we're able to use because, of course, they're much less expensive. Yes? They gave me a weekend to make my decision. And the reason they did that is because if I decided to keep my leg, they were going to have to take skin from other parts of my body to reconstruct my heel, which was blown off entirely. And it was going to be very intrusive on the other parts of my body. So they said, we really don't want to do that to you if you are going to elect to have your leg amputated. So I didn't have much time at all. And sometimes I look back at that time and think, they made me make this decision in a weekend. I was on drugs, but I had a lot of support around me, and I definitely made the right decision. I told you about my friend Jessica, who struggled with that other leg, and she tells me that she's doing more now on her 2 prosthetic legs than she ever could have done with that leg she was trying to save. So I know I did the right thing. Anything else? Yes?
Your leg looks really good, right? It looks the skin is a great match. How did they do it? Was custom made for you, and what kind of materials do they use? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this leg that I'm wearing today was a custom-made leg, and that's one of the reasons why it's so expensive. Typically, you see prosthetic devices that are metal legs, like you see many of our veterans wearing, and I do have one of those. But this leg was designed to look just like my real one. It has toenails. I get them painted. They're acrylic. And it was molded after my real leg. It was made by an artist who works on movie sets and color matched to match my skin tone. It has birthmarks. It has little marks where it looks like I shaved, even though I didn't have to. I even got an option for a tattoo. And I thought, I'd only have to live with it 3 to 5 years. Maybe I should. So yeah, it's very much customized. It's made of silicone. But underneath it is that metal leg that you see the most other people wearing. All right. Oh, one more? Yeah.
I was just wondering if it was really painful, if it still is painful for you, or?
It is not. It's not painful anymore. At first it was because the amputation was so new and the incision was still fresh. I think it was just, unusual to be bearing weight on that part of my body. But I'm so used to it now. And sometimes I try to think back to that first time when I walked in my prosthetic leg. And I remember the first thing I thought of was, you've got to be kidding me. Like, people walk on this? It felt nothing like a real leg. But I think now, I've been walking on it for so long that I don't even remember what it's like to walk on 2 legs. So it's perfectly normal for me. It doesn't hurt. It gets tired sometimes and that sort of thing, but I wear it from the second I get up in the morning until I go to bed at night, and I wear it every single day. Well, I thank you very much for your attention today, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks again.